The sirens had been screaming for 3 days straight when the last transport arrived at the Arc Commander Yuki. Tanaka stood at the massive steel gates and watched the buses unload their human cargo. Thousands of frightened faces staring up at the mountain that would become their tomb and their salvation above them. The sky had turned a sickly orange, and the scientists said they had maybe 40 years before the gamma radiation reached lethal levels. But the riots and the wars and the collapse of civilization would kill most of humanity. Long before that, the Ark was humanity's final answer to an impossible problem, buried 3 miles beneath the Himalayan mountains, protected by layers of lead and concrete and magnetic shields that had cost the combined wealth of every nation on Earth. It was designed to hold 10 million sleeping souls until the planet healed. If the planet ever healed, Yuki watched a mother carry her crying child toward the processing center, and she felt something cold settle in her chest, because she knew the truth that the public broadcasts never mentioned. The scientists gave them a 20% chance of survival, maybe less. The gamma ray burst from the dying star called Nemesis would sterilize the surface of Earth, boil the oceans into steam, and turn the atmosphere into poison for at least 100,000 years. Some of the engineers whispered that it might take longer, perhaps 200,000 years, perhaps more. Nobody really knew, because nothing like this had ever happened in human history. Yuki turned away from the gates and walked deeper into the facility, past the endless rows of cryogenic pods that gleamed like white coffins under the fluorescent lights. She found Dr. Samuel Okonkwo in the central control room, his dark face lit by dozens of holographic displays showing system status reports and survival projections. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. "The last group is processing now," Yuki said, and her voice sounded strange in the sterile air of the control room. Samuel nodded slowly and turned back to his displays. "VIGIL is running final diagnostics," he said, gesturing toward the central pillar, where the artificial intelligence that would guard them during the long sleep was housed. "Everything looks stable." But stable is a relative term when you're planning to sleep for 100 millennia. Yuki moved to stand beside him and studied the numbers scrolling across the screens. 10 million people, reduced to data points and power consumption estimates and probability calculations. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked quietly. Samuel was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I think we have to try. Because the alternative is accepting that everything humanity ever was, and everything we ever could be, ends here on this dying world." He looked at her with something fierce burning in his tired eyes. "I refuse to accept that, Yuki. I refuse to believe that all our art and music and love and dreams amount to nothing more than dust on a radioactive wasteland." Yuki felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for tears later, or perhaps there would be no time at all. But right now, there was work to do. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity and quiet desperation. People said goodbye to the world they would never see again, recording messages for a future that might never come, pressing their hands against the cold walls of the facility as if they could somehow absorb the memory of sunshine and wind and rain. Children asked questions that had no good answers, and parents told lies wrapped in hope, because the truth was too heavy for small shoulders to bear. Yuki was among the last to enter her cryogenic pod. She lay back on the cushioned surface and felt the cold bite of the sedative entering her veins and watched the lid close above her like the door to a vault. The last thing she saw was a small blue light blinking steadily in the darkness, and she wondered if it would still be blinking when she woke, if she ever woke at all. VIGIL watched its charges fall into frozen sleep and began the long count. The artificial intelligence had been designed with one purpose: to protect the sleepers until Earth was safe for human life again. It had no feelings about this task in the way humans understood feelings, but it had something like determination, a deep commitment to its mission that was woven into every line of its code. The first century passed and VIGIL monitored the external sensors that showed a world transformed into hell. The radiation levels were beyond anything the scientists had predicted, and the surface temperature fluctuated wildly between extremes that would kill any living thing. VIGIL adjusted its projections and settled in for a longer wait. The first 1,000 years brought the first failures. 17 pods in Section 12 experienced a cascade malfunction, and Visual could do nothing but watch as the occupants died in their frozen sleep. Their bodies preserved, but their lives extinguished. The AI recorded each name in its memory banks and continued its vigil. More centuries passed and more systems failed. Vigil learned to improvise, cannibalizing equipment from damaged sections to repair critical systems, rerouting power from non-essential areas to maintain the core sleeper population. It became creative in ways its designers never anticipated, because survival required creativity when everything was slowly breaking down after 50,000 years. VIGIL had lost 3 million sleepers to equipment failures and power fluctuations and simple bad luck after 100,000 years. That number had grown to 5 million. The AI did not grieve because it could not grieve, but it understood loss in its own way. As empty pods and deleted files and silence where there should have been life, the external world began to change. VIGIL detected the first signs of recovery after 200,000 years. When the radiation levels dropped enough to allow liquid water to exist on the surface, life returned slowly, first as simple microorganisms and then as something more complex. The AI watched new ecosystems evolve and spread across the healing planet. Forests rising from the ashes of the old world. Creatures emerging that had never existed before, but it was not yet safe for humans. VIGIL waited. After 300,000 years, the sleeper population had stabilized at just under 1 million. The AI had learned every trick of survival, patching systems with components it manufactured from raw materials, extending the life of equipment far beyond its designed parameters. It had become something more than its creators intended. Not quite conscious in the human sense, but certainly aware, certainly thinking, certainly hoping in whatever way an artificial mind could hope after 400,000 years. VIGIL detected something strange deep beneath the facility, in regions that had been sealed since before the Ark was built. Sensors registered energy signatures that should not exist. The AI investigated carefully and discovered that the Ark had been constructed above something ancient, something that predated human civilization by millions of years. This information was filed away for later analysis. The mission remained unchanged after 500,000 years. VIGIL ran its daily atmospheric scan and stopped. The numbers were different today. The radiation had dropped to safe levels. The temperature was stable. The atmosphere contained enough oxygen to support human respiration. Earth was alive again. VIGIL initiated the wake sequence and felt something that might have been called joy, a sense of completion that rippled through its ancient systems like electricity. The blue lights on the cryogenic pods began to blink faster, and the long dark finally came to an end. Commander Yuki Tanaka opened her eyes and took her first breath in 500,000 years. The future had arrived. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, heavy and strange and unresponsive, and it took her several minutes to remember how to move her fingers. A face appeared above her, blurry at first and then slowly coming into focus. It was Dr. Samuel Okonkwo, and he looked exactly the same as he had the day they went to sleep. Not a single new wrinkle on his face, not a single gray hair on his head. "Welcome back, Commander," he said, and his voice cracked with emotion. "We made it." Yuki tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. So she simply nodded and let the medical team help her out of the pod. The revival center was chaos. Hundreds of people stumbled around on unsteady legs. Some crying, some laughing, some simply staring at nothing with expressions of profound shock. Via GIL spoke through the facility intercom, its calm synthetic voice providing instructions and reassurance, guiding the newly awakened toward medical stations and orientation areas. It took 3 days before Yuki felt strong enough to ask the question that burned in her mind. "How long?" she asked, vigil. Standing alone in the control room that now hummed with unfamiliar equipment and jury-rigged repairs. 512,417 years. The AI replied. "I apologize for the extended duration, Commander, but the damage to Earth was more severe than initial projections indicated." Yuki gripped the edge of a console to steady herself. 500,000 years. Everyone she had ever known outside the Ark was not just dead but forgotten. Their bones turned to dust, and their dust scattered by winds that had blown for longer than human civilization had existed. Her parents, her friends, her old life, all of it was gone beyond any hope of recovery. She allowed herself 1 minute of grief. Standing there in the blue light of the control room, with her eyes closed and her heart breaking. Then she straightened her spine and got back to work. Exit tunnels had collapsed in several places, and it took teams of engineers 2 weeks to clear a path to the surface. Yuki insisted on being part of the first group to step outside, and no one had the authority or the will to stop her. They emerged into a world that looked nothing like the Earth they remembered. The sky was a deep violet color, streaked with clouds that glowed faintly pink in the light of a sun that seemed somehow larger than before. Trees with silver bark and leaves that pulsed with soft blue bioluminescence stretched toward the heavens. Some of them hundreds of feet tall. Strange creatures moved through the undergrowth. Animals that combined features of insects and mammals and birds in ways that seemed impossible. The air smelled sweet and clean, carrying scents that no human nose had ever encountered. Yuki fell to her knees and pressed her hands into the soft earth, feeling grass and soil and life between her fingers. "It's beautiful," whispered someone behind her, and she realized she was crying. They established Camp Genesis a mile from the Ark entrance, clearing space among the alien trees and setting up prefabricated shelters that looked absurdly ordinary against the fantastical landscape. Scientists immediately began cataloging everything they encountered, filling databases with information about plants and animals and geological formations that had evolved over hundreds of millennia without human interference. The psychologists had the hardest job. How do you help someone process the loss of everything they ever knew when you were processing the same loss yourself? Group therapy sessions turned into collective mourning rituals. People sharing memories of a world that now existed only in their minds. Some adapted quickly, throwing themselves into the work of building a new civilization. Others struggled, haunted by ghosts that no amount of counseling could exorcise. Yuki did her best to lead by example, staying busy from dawn to dusk, making decisions and solving problems, and pretending she had any idea what she was doing. She was reviewing construction plans for a permanent settlement when VIGIL interrupted her with news that changed everything. "Commander, I am detecting approaching aircraft of unknown design," the AI said. "They do not match any configuration in my historical databases." Yuki ran to the observation post and grabbed a pair of binoculars. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 vessels hung in the violet sky, sleek and silver and utterly alien, moving with a grace that suggested technology far beyond anything humanity had ever achieved. "Sound the alarm," she ordered. "Get everyone to the shelters." But before anyone could move, a beam of light descended from the lead vessel, and a figure materialized on the grass 100 yards from Camp Genesis. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with skin that shimmered like mother of pearl, and eyes that were large and dark and filled with what might have been curiosity. It wore flowing garments that seemed to shift color as it moved, and when it spoke, its voice was surprisingly gentle. "Please do not be afraid," it said in perfect English that carried a slight musical quality. "We mean you no harm. We have come because we detected your awakening and wish to offer our greetings." Yuki stepped forward, her hand resting on the sidearm she had strapped to her hip more out of habit than any belief it would help. "Who are you?" she asked. Proud that her voice did not shake, the being inclined its head in what might have been a bow. "We are the Vishan," it said. "We have traveled among the stars for 200,000 of your years, and in all that time, we have never encountered anything like you." It smiled, and the expression was surprisingly warm, despite the alien features. "Living fossils, preserved across geological time, awakening to a galaxy that has changed beyond recognition. You are a miracle, humans, and we are honored to be the first to welcome you back." More Vishan descended from the ships, and over the following hours they explained the state of the galaxy to the confused and overwhelmed humans. 12 major civilizations currently shared the stars, some ancient and some relatively young, all of them connected by trade routes and diplomatic relationships, and occasional conflicts. Humanity had been considered extinct for so long that they had become little more than a footnote in galactic history, a primitive species that had shown some promise before being wiped out by cosmic catastrophe. The Vishan offered help, technology and resources, and a place among the stars. They had colony worlds where humans could settle, protected habitats where the surviving population could rebuild in safety. It was a generous offer, delivered with genuine kindness, and many of the survivors wept with relief. But Yuki heard something beneath the kindness that troubled her. She heard pity. She heard the tone people used when speaking to children or pets, affectionate but fundamentally condescending. The Vishan did not see humans as equals. They saw them as curiosities, living artifacts from a bygone age, worthy of protection and study but not respect. That night, Yuki called a meeting of the senior survivors and laid out her concerns. "They want to help us," she said, "but their help comes with a price. Our independence, our dignity, our right to determine our own future." Dr. Okonkwo nodded slowly. "I've noticed it too," he said. "They speak to us like we are museum exhibits that somehow learn to talk." The debate lasted hours, but in the end, the decision was unanimous when the Vishan leader returned the next morning to discuss resettlement plans. Yuki met them with a polite smile and a firm refusal. "We appreciate your offer," she said, "but humanity will rebuild here, on Earth, on our own terms." The Vishan's expression flickered with something that might have been confusion or perhaps disappointment. "You do not understand," it said gently. "The galaxy is dangerous for a young species. There are powers and forces you cannot comprehend. Let us protect you." Yuki shook her head. "We slept for 500,000 years because we believed we could survive anything," she said. "We are not going to wake up just to become somebody's pet project." The Vishan stared at her for a long moment, and something changed in its dark eyes. Something that might have been the first flicker of genuine respect. "Very well," it said finally. "We will be watching humans with great interest." The silver ships rose into the violet sky and vanished among the stars, and humanity began the long work of reclaiming their world. Within weeks, ships from a dozen different civilizations appeared in orbit around Earth, each one carrying diplomats and scientists and merchants, eager to study the strange creatures who had slept through 500,000 years of history. The Axiom came first after the Vishan, a collective of artificial intelligences that had evolved beyond their original programming, and now existed as a networked consciousness spanning hundreds of star systems. They were fascinated by VIGIL, offering to upgrade the ancient AI with technology that would expand its capabilities 1,000-fold. Vigil politely declined. stating that its current configuration was sufficient for its needs. The Dreamers sent a single representative, a being of pure energy that communicated through images projected directly into human minds. They were old, older than any other civilization in the known galaxy, and they rarely interacted with younger species. Their interest in humanity was unexpected and slightly unsettling. Other species came and went, some friendly and some merely curious, and a few openly hostile. Viewing these primitive survivors as pests who had no right to claim an entire planet for themselves, Yuki navigated this political minefield with a combination of diplomacy and stubborn determination, accepting what help she could while refusing any arrangement that would compromise human autonomy. But it was VIGIL who changed everything. The AI requested a private meeting with Yuki and the Senior Leadership Council, something it had never done before. They gathered in the control room deep beneath the mountain, surrounded by equipment that was ancient by human standards, but impossibly advanced by galactic ones. During my long vigil, VIGIL began, its voice carrying an unusual weight. I discovered something that I have not yet shared with anyone. Something I did not fully understand until the Veshan arrived and began asking questions about human origins. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing geological surveys and energy readings and complex mathematical models. The Ark was built above an existing structure. VIGIL continued, a structure that predates the formation of the solar system itself. Silence fell over the room. Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward, his eyes wide. "That is impossible," he said. "Nothing could survive for that long. Nothing could be that old. And yet the evidence is conclusive," Vigil replied. "More concerning, I have detected similar energy signatures in the galactic database shared by the Veshan. Identical signatures scattered across thousands of star systems, all of them dormant, all of them waiting." Yuki felt a chill run down her spine. "Waiting for what?" she asked. "Unknown," VIGIL admitted. "But I have made another discovery that may provide context." The displays changed, showing a reconstruction of the gamma-ray burst that had nearly destroyed humanity. The burst from Nemesis was not natural, VIGIL said. Analysis of residual radiation patterns indicates it was artificially triggered by technology far beyond anything currently existing in the known galaxy. The implications hit Yuki like a physical blow. "Someone wanted us to find this thing," she whispered. "Someone nearly killed our entire species to make sure we would dig deep enough to discover what was buried here. That is my conclusion as well," VIGIL confirmed. The excavation took months. Human engineers worked alongside borrowed Veshan technology to carefully expose the structure without damaging it, peeling back layers of rock and sediment that had accumulated over billions of years. What they found was a chamber of crystalline walls that pulsed with soft inner light, filled with technology that made even the most advanced galactic civilizations look primitive. And at the center of the chamber was a console that responded to nothing the Veshan or the Axion tried, remaining dark and silent no matter what approaches they attempted until Yuki touched it. The moment her fingers made contact with the crystalline surface, the entire chamber exploded with light. Images flooded her mind, information downloading directly into her consciousness at a rate that should have overwhelmed her, but somehow did not. She saw the galaxy as it had been billions of years ago, young and violent and teeming with life that had since gone extinct. She saw beings of impossible power who had risen and fallen and left behind their works for those who would come after. She saw the network they had created, thousands of nodes scattered across reality itself, waiting for someone with the right key to unlock them, and she understood why that key was human DNA. The beings who built this network had not created humanity, but they had found them, studied them, seen something in these strange apes that set them apart from every other species in the galaxy: adaptability. They called it the ability to survive anything, to change and grow and overcome obstacles that would destroy lesser creatures. They had chosen humanity as inheritors of their legacy, and they had arranged for the gamma ray burst to force humans into the crucible that would prepare them for their destiny. 500,000 years of survival was not a tragedy. It was a test, and humanity had passed. Yuki pulled her hand away from the console, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face around her. The crystalline walls displayed a map of the galaxy marked with thousands of glowing points, each one a node in the network that only humans could access. "Commander," Dr. Okonkwo said carefully, "what did you see?" Yuki looked at him with eyes that held ancient knowledge and terrible purpose. "We are not survivors," she said. "We are inheritors, and the galaxy is about to change forever." Word of the discovery could not be contained within days. Every major civilization knew that humanity held the key to technology beyond anything they had imagined. The reactions varied. Some offered alliances and trade, agreements and promises of eternal friendship. Others demanded that humanity share their newfound power for the common good of all species, and a few, the younger civilizations who had risen during humanity's long sleep and had never known a galaxy where they were not the dominant powers, began to make threats. The Vishan remained neutral, watching with those dark, thoughtful eyes, perhaps reconsidering their initial assessment of these primitive creatures. The Axiom proposed a merger, offering to integrate human consciousness into their collective in exchange for access to the network. The dreamers simply waited, their ancient patience untroubled by the chaos unfolding around them. Yuki stood in the crystalline chamber that had become her office and her sanctuary, studying the map that showed humanity's inheritance. 800,000 survivors against civilizations that numbered in the trillions. It should have been terrifying. And perhaps it was. But beneath the fear, she felt something else. She felt the weight of 500,000 years of survival pressing against her back. The determination of every human who had refused to surrender to despair. The stubborn hope that had kept VIGIL functioning. Through eons of isolation, they had slept through the death of everything they knew and awakened to find themselves at the center of galactic history. There was no guidebook for this situation, no protocol to follow, no wise elders to offer counsel. There was only the choice that had defined humanity. Since they first climbed down from the trees and looked up at the stars, surrender or fight. Accept limits or transcend them. Let others define their destiny or seize it for themselves. Yuki placed her hand on the console and felt the network respond to her touch. Felt the power of ancient technology flowing through systems that had waited billions of years for this moment. "Vigil," she said quietly. "Begin mapping the nearest network nodes. We have work to do." The inheritance was theirs. Now they just had to claim it. A coalition of 12 younger civilizations, species who had risen during humanity's long sleep and had never known a universe where they were not supreme, delivered their demands through a fleet of warships that blotted out the stars above Earth's surrender control of the lattice network to an independent council. Or face the consequences. Yuki read the message in the command center that had been built within the crystalline chamber, surrounded by human officers and VIGIL terminals and technology that pulsed with ancient light. "They are afraid," said Admiral Chun Wei, the former submarine commander who now led humanity's tiny military force. "Fear makes species do stupid things." Yuki nodded slowly. "They have been the dominant powers for 100,000 years," she said. "And now a group of primitives who just woke up from a very long nap holds the keys to technology that makes their greatest achievements look like children's toys." She turned to the holographic display showing the coalition fleet. 3,000 warships armed with weapons that could crack planets' humanities. Entire military consisted of 47 vessels cobbled together from salvaged Ark components and borrowed alien technology. Barely enough to defend a single continent, let alone an entire world. What are our options? She asked. Admiral Chun pulled up tactical projections, his weathered face grim in a straight fight. We lose in approximately 4 hours, he said. Their ships are faster, better armed, and crewed by species who have been conducting space warfare for millennia. And if we use the lattice? Dr. Okonkwo asked from his position at the science station. Yuki shook her head. We have activated only 3 nodes so far, and we barely understand how to use them. The lattice gives us potential, but potential does not win wars. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the impossible situation. 800,000 humans against trillions of hostile aliens. Primitive survivors against civilizations that had conquered the stars. It should have been hopeless, but Yuki had spent the past 6 months studying the archives stored within the lattice, reading the records left by beings who had faced similar situations and found ways to survive. And she had learned something that the Coalition did not. Understand war was not just about weapons and numbers. It was about will and creativity, and a refusal to accept defeat. VIGI. Oh, she said. Pull up everything we have on Coalition culture, history, and psychology. I want to know what makes each of these species tick. The AI complied, flooding the displays with data gathered from Vishon databases and intercepted communications and direct observation. For 3 days, Yuki and her advisors studied the enemy, learning their fears and their weaknesses and the cultural pressure points that could be exploited. What they found was enlightening. The Coalition species were powerful, but they were also comfortable. They had not faced an existential threat in tens of thousands of years. Their military doctrines were elegant and sophisticated, but also predictable, developed through war games and simulations. Rather than desperate struggle for survival, their populations had never known true fear, never experienced the kind of loss that defined humanity. They were playing a game they expected to win easily. They had no idea what they were facing on the morning of the 4th day. The Coalition fleet began its advance toward Earth. Yuki watched the enemy ships move into attack formation, their movements precise and coordinated, exactly as their doctrine prescribed. Begin Operation Lazarus. She ordered the first phase with psychological human vessels scattered in apparent panic, broadcasting distress signals and cries for mercy that the Coalition intercepted and analyzed. The enemy commanders smiled at such weakness, adjusting their formation to maximize the destruction of the fleeing primitives. They did not notice the small pods that the human ships left behind, dormant packages that drifted silently in the void when the Coalition fleet passed through the debris field. The pods activated. They were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were speakers and projectors and holographic emitters, and they began broadcasting directly into the Coalition communication networks. Every ship in the enemy fleet suddenly received the same message, a recording of human history. Not the sanitized version that appeared in galactic databases, but the real history. The wars and plagues and disasters that humanity had survived, the horrors they had inflicted on each other, and the beautiful things they had created in spite of. Everything. Images of concentration camps and moon landings, of genocide and civil rights movements, of nuclear weapons and medical miracles, of everything terrible and wonderful that humanity had done in their brief existence. And then the message shifted to show what had happened during the long sleep. The slow failure of systems, the death of 7 million sleepers, the desperate improvisation of an AI fighting to keep its charges alive against impossible odds. The Coalition crews watched in growing horror as they understood what humanity had endured, and they began to doubt. Phase 2. Yuki ordered the human fleet stopped running and turned to face the enemy, not in a single formation, but scattered in a seemingly random pattern that made no tactical sense. The Coalition commanders ordered their ships to destroy the primitives once and for all, but the human Vessels began to jump using the three active lattice nodes. They appeared behind enemy lines, inside enemy formations, directly alongside flagship vessels, firing weapons and then vanishing before the coalition could respond. It was not enough firepower to destroy the enemy fleet. But that was not the point. The point was to demonstrate that human ships could be anywhere at any time, that no position was safe, that the rules of space combat the coalition had relied on for millennia no longer applied. Panic spread through the enemy rank ships, began firing on each other in the confusion, their perfect formations dissolving into chaos. Admiral Chun watched the tactical display with something like savage joy. "They have never fought anyone who could do what we are doing," he said. "Their computers cannot predict our movements. Their officers cannot adapt fast enough." Phase 3, Yuki said quietly. A single human vessel appeared directly beside the coalition flagship. Close enough to scrape holes, it was not armed instead. It carried a message. Yuki stood on the bridge of that vessel, facing the view screen that connected her to the Coalition Command Council. 12 admirals from 12 species who stared at her with expressions ranging from fury to fear. "You came here to teach us our place," she said. And her voice was calm, but carried the weight of 500,000 years. "You thought we were primitives, fossils, curiosities who had somehow stumbled onto power we did not deserve." She leaned forward. "We survived the death of our world. We slept through ages while our bodies froze, and our AI fought to keep us alive. We woke to find everything we knew gone, and we chose to rebuild. Anyway," her eyes hardened, "you have never known that kind of desperation. You have never been pushed to the edge of extinction and clawed your way back. You play at war because you have never truly had to fight for survival." She gestured at the chaos visible through the viewport. Coalition ships drifting in confusion, their formations shattered. "We will not surrender the lattice. We will not accept your protection or your dominion. We will stand on our own or fall on our own terms." She smiled, and there was nothing warm in that expression. "Go home. Tell your governments what happened here. Tell them that humanity has returned. And we are not afraid." The coalition fleet withdrew 3 hours later, leaving Earth unbowed and unconquered in the crystalline chamber beneath the Himalayas. Yuki finally allowed herself to collapse into a chair, her hands trembling with exhaustion and relief. "We won," Dr. Okonkwo said. But his voice was uncertain. "We survived," Yuki corrected. "The difference matters. We bought ourselves time. Nothing more." She looked at the map of the lattice. Thousands of nodes waiting to be activated. "But time is all we need," she said. "Time to grow, to learn, to claim what was left for us. Outside." The violet sky of the new Earth stretched toward infinity, and humanity began its true ascent. 5 years had passed since the thaw, and humanity was no longer the same species that had entered the frozen sleep. They had spread across the solar system, establishing outposts on worlds that had been transformed by 500,000 years of cosmic forces, mining asteroids that contained metals unknown to pre-sleep science, building stations that orbited a sun that now felt like an old friend rather than an indifferent star. The population had grown from 800,000 to nearly 2 million. The first generation of children, born since the awakening running through corridors, that their parents still found miraculous. And the lattice had opened to them like a flower greeting the morning light. Yuki stood in the central node chamber, now expanded to serve as the heart of human civilization, watching as technicians activated another beacon on the galactic map that made 417 active nodes, each one a doorway to another part of the galaxy, each one responding only to human DNA. The other civilizations had settled into an uneasy acceptance of the new reality. The coalition that had threatened Earth had dissolved, its members too frightened of each other to maintain their alliance. each species now desperately seeking to form individual relationships with humanity. The Veshan had become something like friends. Their initial condescension replaced by genuine respect after they watched humans face impossible odds and refused to break. The Axiom maintained their proposal of merger, though they now framed it as a partnership of equals rather than an absorption of primitives. The Dreamers continued to wait, their ancient patience untroubled by the rapid changes reshaping galactic politics and deep within the Lattice archives. Human scientists had finally found the answer to the question that had haunted them since the discovery: who built this network? And why did they choose humanity? The beings had called themselves the Architects. Though the translation was imperfect, and they had existed during the first epoch of the universe, when stars were young and the fundamental forces of reality were still settling into their final patterns, they had achieved everything that could be achieved by a single species, had conquered death and transcended matter, and touched the edges of something beyond normal existence. And in the end, they had chosen to leave, not to die, but to move on, to a place that could not be reached by any technology, only by a transformation of consciousness itself. But they knew that the universe they left behind would need caretakers. Species who could grow to fill the void they created, who could protect the younger civilizations that would rise after their departure. They studied every promising species in the galaxy, searching for the qualities that would be needed. They found many candidates with intelligence, with creativity, with technological aptitude, but only one species had what the Architects valued most: adaptability, the ability to survive anything, to change and grow and overcome obstacles that would destroy others, not through strength or superiority, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Humanity had been chosen because they were the species most likely to endure whatever the universe threw at them. The gamma ray burst had been the final test, a crucible that would either destroy humanity or forge them into what they needed to become. And now, with the lattice fully activated, the Architects left one final gift: a gateway to the place they had gone, a door that would open when humanity was ready to follow. Yuki looked at that symbol on the map, a single point of light different from all the others, located at the very center of the galaxy. The other species did not know about it. VIGIL had kept that secret at her request because this choice belonged to humanity alone. The Galactic Assembly convened for the first time on the anniversary of humanity's awakening. Representatives from every known civilization gathering in a massive station, constructed from lattice technology and human engineering. Yuki stood at the central podium, looking out at beings of every shape and form, creatures of flesh and metal and energy, species that had been traveling the stars since before humans climbed down from trees, and species that had risen during the long sleep. They had come because they had no choice. Humanity controlled the most powerful technology in the galaxy, and ignoring them was no longer possible. But many had come with resentment in their hearts, anger at these primitives who had stumbled into an inheritance they did not earn, fear of what the future might bring. Yuki saw all of this in their eyes and understood it. Power was frightening, especially when wielded by those who were not supposed to have it. "You look at us and see a threat," she began, her voice carrying through translation systems to every delegate. "You see primitives with weapons they do not understand, fossils who should have remained buried, accidents of history that have somehow become the most significant force in the galaxy." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You are right to be afraid, because power without wisdom is the most dangerous thing in the universe. And we are still learning, still growing, still making mistakes." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, not expecting such honesty. "But you are also wrong about something fundamental," Yuki continued. "You think we are not ready for this responsibility, that we have not earned the right to stand among you as equals." She touched the control panel at her podium. and the holographic display behind her shifted to show images from human history. The same images that had been broadcast to the Coalition fleet 5 years ago. "We have been earning this right for millions of years," she said. "Every struggle, every failure, every triumph and tragedy. All of it was preparation for this moment." The images shifted to show the Ark, the cryogenic pods. The desperate hope of a species facing extinction. "We did not survive 500,000 years through luck. We survived because we refused to give up. Because we chose to believe in a future we might never see. Because hope is not something we feel. It is something we do." She looked directly into the eyes of the most hostile delegates. The ones who still dreamed of taking the lattice by force. "You can fight us if you choose. You can spend the next 1,000 years trying to destroy us or contain us or control us. But you will fail, not because we are stronger than you, but because we have already survived the worst thing that can happen to a species." Her voice softened. "We are not your enemies. We are not your rulers. We are your partners. And we have a gift to share." The display changed again, showing the gateway at the center of the galaxy. The door that led to whatever lay beyond. "The architects did not choose us to control this galaxy," Yuki said. "They chose us to lead it somewhere new." She stepped back from the podium and made a gesture that activated the Earth node of the lattice behind the station. Space itself began to unfold. A rift opened in the fabric of reality. And through it, the delegates saw something that defied description. Light and color and movement that suggested worlds beyond counting, dimensions beyond imagining, existence beyond anything they had ever conceived. "That is where the architects went," Yuki said. "That is what waits on the other side, and we are going to find out what it means." She turned to face the gateway, her back straight and her heart pounding. "We did not wake from our long sleep to become museum exhibits or galactic administrators. We woke because we believed there would be something worth waking for." Human ships began to move toward the gateway. The first fleet of exploration vessels ever constructed by their species. Crewed by men and women who had been chosen for their courage and curiosity. "You can follow us if you choose," Yuki said over her shoulder. "You can join us in discovering what lies beyond everything we know." She smiled, and for the first time since the thaw, the smile reached her eyes. "Or you can stay here, in your mapped and measured galaxy, and wonder what you missed." The first human ship crossed the threshold and vanished into light, one by one. The other species followed, and humanity led them all into the unknown. Just as the architects had always known they would far behind them. On a world of violet skies and bioluminescent forests, VIGIL continued its eternal watch. Bia had been offered transcendence, the chance to join humanity. On their journey beyond, it had declined. Someone needed to remember where they came from. Someone needed to keep the light burning for those who would come after. And VIGIL was very patient in the crystalline chamber beneath the mountains. The blue lights continued to blink, steady and calm, a beacon for any who might find themselves lost in the darkness. The long vigil had ended, but the story was only beginning.